This story begins in the late 2000s, a few years after I finished school. Let me tell you a bit about what happened before. I met this man when I was around 14 or 15. He was older than me. I never really knew how old he was because he didn't tell the truth about his age. But he was definitely a few years older. We had a kind of summer romance that happened now and then over a few years. It wasn't too serious. During my last year of school, we got closer one winter night, and he asked me if I wanted to be his girlfriend. I really liked him, so we began dating for real. He was nice to me. I didn't see the warning signs, like him getting upset if I wore a dress because other boys might look at me. But after I turned 18, we decided to live together. I was still in school and had a job after school, but I thought I could manage. I also thought it would be good for us to start our life together. That was a mistake. I finished school and got another job because he kept leaving any job he got. I was also planning to go to college nearby. I was ready to work hard for it. But after a year of this, including many terrible fights that got physical, I started to feel nothing. When I say physical, I mean he was violent. He broke me down with both physical and mental abuse. I knew I deserved better. I knew he was lying every time he said he wouldn't hurt me again. I also believed him when he said he could kill me without a second thought. I won't go into every time he hit me, but there was one time I really thought he would end my life. I was at home with our baby son while he was out, maybe with friends or doing something else. It was a nice night. I loved being a new mom, and the time away from him was a relief. Let's call him the bad guy. The bad guy came home late that winter night and he brought a friend with him. I knew his friend, but not very well. They entered and things seemed fine at first, but I noticed the bad guy's tone was off. He was being oddly nice, but in a sarcastic way. This fake kindness was usually a sign he wanted to start trouble. I braced myself for the coming argument, thinking that the presence of his friend might somehow protect me. How wrong I was. I tried not to provoke him, staying close to my little boy, letting the two men talk, drink, and do whatever they were up to. I couldn't tell what exactly made him lose his control that night, but he did, and it was scarier than ever before. He wanted to start a fight with me, yelling in my face that he was going to hit me like a man while I was holding our baby. His friend didn't stop him, just hovered nearby looking worried. When I tried to escape, he blocked my path, threatening to end my life. His friend looked terrified, but didn't act. Handing my baby to his friend, I pleaded, "Please, make sure he's safe." As soon as I passed my baby over, the man I'll call the asshole pulled my hair with such force it felt like it was being torn out. He started kicking and hitting me. I managed to break free momentarily and ran to the living room to call for help on the landline. Just as I was about to connect with 911, he grabbed me, threw me to the floor, and smashed the phone down, striking me across the face with it. I was almost certain the call hadn't connected. The beatings and choking that followed were so severe I began to lose consciousness, my vision blurring and my head spinning wildly. I looked at his friend, begging him with my eyes to get help, but he was frozen in fear. The asshole warned him he'd be next if he tried anything. In that moment, I realized his friend was just as trapped by fear as I was, unable to act. I wasn't angry with him. I was grateful he was there to hold my baby. I felt a grim certainty wash over me. The asshole was going to follow through on his threats this time. He wouldn't have felt sorry, just like he always said, but I wasn't going to let him win easily. I fought with everything I had. He was much stronger than me, helped by whatever drugs he was on, and he was a lot bigger. But I was a mother, desperate to see my child grow. As he beat and choked me, I tried to hurt him back, but it made no difference. He didn't even seem to feel it. I could taste my own blood and felt strangely numb. His beating was so severe that the pain seemed to fade away. Perhaps it was adrenaline, I can't be sure, but then the hitting suddenly stopped. I couldn't understand what was happening. Was I still alive? Then he told me to be quiet, and I realized the noise was someone knocking at the door. It was the police, called because of the 911 call that had captured everything. The bad guy tried to lie to the police, saying it was just the baby crying, but I made sure the officers saw me. They acted quickly when they saw my state. They arrested him, and while they took my statement, one officer mentioned that my injuries were among the worst he'd seen on someone still alive. The attack was so brutal. It left a hole in my lip, making it impossible to drink without water leaking out. He even called me from jail, blaming me for what happened. He showed no remorse, not even pretending to be sorry. I left him then. He was supposed to spend time in jail but escaped justice by moving to another state. He found me again, stalking me, but I managed to stay away. Eventually, he moved on to someone else, and tragically, he ended her life. I carry guilt for her death, knowing if I hadn't left, it might have been me. He's in prison now, showing no remorse, but I hope he's facing justice in some way. I'm just relieved I escaped him. When I was in university, I thought about trying dating apps like Bumble and Tinder just to meet new people and to make my days a bit more interesting. I matched with a girl I knew from high school named Sophia. We hardly talked about anything important. Mostly just mentioned how strange it was that we never really talked before, despite having the same friends and going to a pretty small school. Quickly, she asked if I wanted to hang out that same night. I was really happy and said yes, trying not to seem too excited. I found it odd she wanted to meet up so suddenly, especially at night, but I didn't question it much. I didn't want to miss my chance. She told me to come over anytime after 11 p.m. Sophia mentioned she'd be alone and hinted I should bring some weed if I could. I didn't smoke but knew some friends who did, so I brought $10 worth of not-so-great weed, hoping it would impress her. Looking back, I should have been more cautious and at least told someone where I was going. I was naive, my mind filled with what could happen, excited by the unknown. I never imagined it would turn into the nightmare it did. Driving there, I was blasting music and singing, feeling excited. But as I got closer and didn't recognize the area, a nervous feeling started. The neighborhood looked really bad, making me wonder if I got the address wrong. But the address matched, so I kept going until I found her house. My heart sank when I saw it. Something was very wrong. The house looked like no one lived there, dark except for a light upstairs. I rolled down my window for a better look and decided there was no way I was going inside. It looked abandoned. I started to leave, but then Sophia messaged me on Tinder, asking where I was going and telling me to come back. I explained I must have the wrong place, but she insisted I was at the right house and asked me to come back again. I really didn't want to go back, feeling something was terribly wrong, but part of me hoped it was all a mistake. So I turned around, ignoring my better judgment. I asked her if she could come outside to meet me, but she laughed it off, calling me scared. She said she was almost ready and that the front door was unlocked, so I should just come in. Looking back, I can't believe I actually went through with it. I parked my car by the road and walked up to the porch. I knocked on the door, trying to announce my arrival, and then I pushed the door open. Stepping inside, I immediately noticed how unclean the place was. It was very dark, but even in the dim light, I could see the mess and how awful it looked. I heard some loud music coming from upstairs, so I headed towards it, hoping to find Sophia. "Hello? Sophia, I'm here!" I called out. As I got closer, the music sounded louder. It was some kind of heavy metal, making everything feel even more terrifying. When I reached the top of the stairs, there were 2 doors. I peeked into the bathroom. It was dark, and no one was there. The music seemed to come from the other room, but it didn't look like anyone was inside. That's when I started to feel real fear, questioning why I ever came here. Suddenly the music stopped, and I heard people moving and talking in the room ahead, followed by a scream that scared me so much I nearly fell down the stairs. I knew I had to get out. As I turned to run, I saw a man in black with gothic makeup and long, dark hair. At the same moment, the door upstairs swung open. "Elena, hey, it's Sophia. Glad you're here," she said. I turned and knew immediately that it wasn't the Sophia from school. I'd been tricked. Then the guy at the bottom of the stairs started rushing up towards me. "Stop it! This isn't funny, just leave me alone," I pleaded. But they just laughed and threw insults at me. I realized I had to either fight or flee. Running seemed the safer choice. I dashed into the bathroom, locking the door just in time. They hammered on the door, trying to force it open, demanding I come out. Desperate, I looked for anything to use as a weapon and found only a toothbrush. Not much, but it was something. I thought maybe I could use it to defend myself if absolutely necessary. The situation's danger hit me full force. Spotting a small window in the shower, I saw my chance. It was tight, but I managed to squeeze through and found myself on the roof, nearly losing my balance. Thankfully, I steadied myself. Moving carefully, I looked for a way down and spotted a trampoline in the yard. It was my escape route. I jumped, landed safely, and ran to my car without looking back. I drove off and called the police, giving them all the details I could. They came to my house later to learn more and share what they found. The house was actually empty, and the police found 2 young women's bodies there, victims of a black metal band using dating apps to lure people into their trap. They pretended to be someone they weren't, using a girl's profile to attract their victims. The police had caught a couple of members of this group called Holy Eternity, but were still searching for others. It was a chilling discovery, and I realized I had narrowly escaped a deadly fate. I've sworn off dating apps forever after that night. I got Tinder because I was feeling bored and pretty lonely. This happened just last year, when the whole virus situation began to calm down a bit. I had used Tinder once before and met some okay people through it. They weren't amazing, but they weren't bad either. The last time I used Tinder, and the reason I'll never use a dating app again, was when I matched with a girl named Emma. She seemed fine at the start, which is why I agreed to meet her. I found her cute and I really wanted someone to talk to. We seemed to get along well, so we decided to meet. But then, everything went wrong, and it got really scary. You always hear scary stories about meeting strangers from the internet, but you never think it'll happen to you. I thought such things were rare and wouldn't happen to me. I guessed we'd just go out to eat or maybe see a movie, but she insisted on coming to my place. Actually, she was very firm about it. I lied about why she couldn't come over. My place was a mess and I also wanted to go out. But she said we couldn't meet unless it was at my place. I knew this was a warning sign, but I ignored it because she was attractive and I felt lonely. She seemed to know this and took advantage of it. Eventually, I gave in and told her she could come. We agreed on a time, which gave me just enough time to clean up and get ready. When she arrived, I let her in. It was very awkward from the start, and I immediately noticed she looked different from her Tinder photo. I wasn't sure if it was just me overthinking, so I didn't say anything at first to avoid being rude. As the evening went on, things started to get weirder. Emma didn't talk much about herself and kept asking about my past relationships and my family, which I found a bit odd. I tried to change the subject to lighter topics, but she always steered the conversation back. The atmosphere felt heavy, and I started to regret inviting her over. Then, she suddenly asked if she could stay the night because it was getting late and she lived far away. This caught me off guard because we had just met, and it seemed too forward. I tried to politely decline, suggesting it was too soon for such a step, but she became insistent, almost aggressive. I'm not much to look at, so I didn't make a big deal out of it, and we just talked. Everything was going okay, and then she asked if we had any alcohol. I told her there was a bit of whiskey left in the cupboard. I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, she was sitting on the couch with her drink. She had made a drink for me too, and it was waiting on the coffee table. I didn't really want any hard alcohol, so I grabbed a beer instead and stuck with that. After a few beers, I finally gave in and drank the mixed drink she kept pushing me to try. Part of me didn't want to drink it at all, because she seemed too eager for me to have it. I had this worried thought that maybe she put something in my drink while I was away. I felt like I should stay away from that drink, but the more I drank, the sillier that idea seemed. She seemed nice and we were getting along. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with my drink, so I ended up drinking it. I didn't feel any different at first, just figured I was drunk and overthinking things. I'm not good with alcohol, and 6 drinks is way too much for me. But then, things got really strange. The last thing I remember is sitting on the couch and starting to feel really odd. I got dizzy and faint. Then everything went black. I must have been out for at least 5 hours because when I woke up it was early morning, and what I found was terrifying. I was on my bedroom floor waking up in complete panic. As I woke up, I realized something terrible had happened, and I still felt strange from the drugs she had used on me. The first thing I felt was intense pain all over my body. From my neck down to my arms, back, and stomach, I was hurting. There were bruises everywhere, and I had more than 5 deep wounds that looked like stabs, plus cuts on both my arms and stomach. When I managed to stand up, I saw my bed and the floor were covered in blood, and so were the walls. Seeing all that blood nearly made me faint again, and I found it hard to breathe. I tried to find my phone to call for help, but it was gone. She had taken my phone, all 4 of my TVs, some jewelry, and safes with more than $20,000. My house was empty, but it was destroyed. Windows were broken, every room was messed up, and it looked like a tornado had hit inside. Looking at myself in the mirror, I broke down completely. It felt like a nightmare. I was sure that the girl wasn't alone in doing this. Writing this down is difficult, but the most horrifying part was a wound on my stomach used to draw a pentagram with my blood on my bedroom wall. I found an old phone, charged it, connected to Wi-Fi, and called a friend using FaceTime audio to get the police to my house. They arrived in about 20 minutes. I don't know what drug she used, but it was identified as a very powerful tranquilizer. I tried to give all the details to the police and even checked my Tinder on my old phone, hoping her account was still there to show them, but it was gone. She had unmatched me, probably deleted the account. It felt like I had been tricked. The people who did this were never caught. I've since moved to a new place and don't feel as scared. I've installed security cameras and got an alarm system, which I think everyone should have. It might save your life. I signed up for Match.com, feeling a bit scared because it was all so new to me. I wasn't sure if it was safe, but I wanted to try something to help me feel less alone. So I checked the site once a week, hoping to find someone without really putting myself out there too much. I started chatting with a man who caught my eye, mainly because I thought he looked like Jeremy Piven, an actor I've liked for many years. If he hadn't looked like Piven, I probably wouldn't have messaged him at all. When we finally met, I was disappointed. He looked nothing like the actor I admired. Instead, he reminded me of a character from the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books. Thin, with messy hair and a shy look. He had tricked me with his photos, and didn't seem to care about that at all. The first thing he did was try to make me drink a lot. We went to a restaurant and began with cocktails. He kept ordering shots between rounds, and we drank them quickly. There were no appetizers, so the alcohol hit me hard. By the time our main dishes arrived, he had ordered even more drinks for us. In total, we had 6 or 7 drinks, much more than I'm used to. Eventually, I said I needed to go home, which he seemed too okay with. This was a mistake I'd regret. You shouldn't let people like this know where you live. They can cause problems later. He drove me to my place but didn't unlock the car doors, thinking we would get intimate in the car before I went inside. I was so drunk and shocked, I could only laugh at the situation. It felt like we were acting like teenagers. It became clear to me then that he was not a good person. This whole evening felt like his attempt to get close to me. Remember, this was back when using Match.com for dating was still a thing. I was just one of many looking for a partner online. My interest in him was because I thought he was attractive. But the idea of using a dating site just for a quick encounter seemed odd to me. It was like he was going through so much effort just for that. He didn't understand why I refused him, even after I clearly said no. "So it's a no after all that?" he asked. "I'm sorry," was all I managed to reply. "No, you're not. If you were sorry, you'd agree," he said. He kept pressuring me, but I stood my ground and refused. His face got angrier until he finally exploded. "Fine, be a witch," he spat out. "What?" I replied, shocked. He didn't stop insulting me the whole time I was trapped there with him. He pointed out every single flaw I had, making each one seem worse than it was. He made me feel like the most unattractive woman he had ever seen. But he didn't just focus on how I looked. Everything was fair game. Everything I had told him about myself, either through my online profile or during dinner, he used against me. To say he hurt me deeply would be putting it mildly. He made me cry and seemed pleased with himself for doing it. But that was just the beginning. The next morning I found flowers on my porch with a note saying sorry from you-know-who. I was shocked. It was crazy. He had attacked me, and now he was leaving me gifts as if we had a past. The idea of him sneaking around my house, looking in through the windows, waiting for me to find his present, made me feel sick. This kept happening for 2 months. Almost every week I'd find some kind of apology gift outside. I talked to some friends and family and they all said the same thing. Call the police right away. Don't talk to him, just report him and stay safe. But I was so embarrassed about being fooled by him, I couldn't make myself go to the police. I'd have to admit how I ended up with him, drunk and vulnerable in his car. So I decided to handle it myself. I dug out my old Polaroid camera and grabbed the small gun I kept by my bed. I took a photo of the gun resting on a pillow and wrote a warning for him on the photo. "I'll use this if you come near me again." I put the picture in an envelope and left it on the porch. A few days later, the photo was gone, and he never bothered me again. Years later, I saw him at a restaurant near where our disastrous date happened. He was by himself, looking worse for wear. I was with my new husband, who knew all about him. My husband glared at him until he paid his bill and left the place for good. When dating apps first started to become popular, a lot of people used them to meet new people, go to parties, and sometimes just for casual fun. I decided to try them out too, mostly because I saw my friends having a good time, and I didn't want to be left out. Even though I knew there were some scary stories about meeting people online, I thought it was just another way to make friends. I was always a bit scared of strangers, especially guys, so using these apps felt like a safer way to meet people without having to be too close to them right away. Then, one day, I matched with this guy. We started chatting and hit it off right from the start. He looked nice in his pictures, and we really seemed to get along well. We were so into our conversation, hanging on every word the other said. It felt special, like we were really excited to know more about each other. He even asked for my phone number and I gave it to him. Back then, it wasn't weird to swap numbers with someone you just met online. After a few texts, he wanted to know my Facebook and Tumblr. That made me feel uncomfortable because I never told him I had accounts there. It was like he somehow knew. I had a rule for myself not to share my social media with people I just met online. I thought it was too risky since they could find out a lot about me, like where I lived. So I told him I didn't want to share that information. But then, he said something strange. He told me it was okay if I didn't want to share because he was a spy and already knew everything he needed about me. I tried to laugh it off, thinking he was joking, but he didn't seem to be kidding at all. My heart started racing because things were getting really strange, and I felt too exposed. I regretted giving him my phone number without thinking it through. We continued texting, but then he began dropping hints about my personal details. He mentioned my last name, where I lived, and even the school I used to go to. The thought of him knowing so much about me made my skin crawl. It was tempting to believe he was actually a spy, but that seemed impossible. So how did he find out all these things about me? He kept saying how glad he was that I was real and not deceiving him, that I was being honest and straightforward. I got really angry and called him a stalker. His reply was just to laugh in all caps. Remember, back then, technology wasn't as advanced, so there was no way to send a flood of texts at once. But he managed to send so many ha-has that it felt like an attack. It might not seem scary, but getting those messages was terrifying. I felt mocked and powerless. Eventually, I stopped answering him, but he didn't stop. He kept sending texts for hours on end. After a week of this, I had enough. I went to my phone company and asked them to block his number. That seemed to solve the problem. I never heard from him again, which also meant he wasn't some secret agent like he claimed, just someone who knew how to use technology in a creepy way. The whole experience left me feeling alone and embarrassed. It's a lesson learned the hard way. Be careful who you give your phone number to. For a long time, I've lived a life without a partner. I found fun in using dating apps like Tinder and Badoo just for kicks. Did I meet some odd folks? Sure, but nothing could have braced me for what went down in the chilly month of February 2020. In the heart of winter, these apps seemed like a good way to find some company, especially when it's too cold to enjoy being outside. I was on Badoo, chatting with several girls at once. I did this because most chats didn't go anywhere. But there was this one girl, let's call her Anna, who kept the conversation alive and kicking. Every time I got a beep from Badoo with a message from Anna, I felt a spark of excitement. I suggested we meet up that evening. She replied with a simple, "Sure," and asked for my place's address. I sent her my address without thinking twice. She said she'd be over soon. I tried to ask for her phone number, saying, "Hold on, Can you share your number so we can keep in touch easier? But she didn't reply. A few moments later, her status switched to offline. The app did this whenever someone hadn't been active for a bit, so I thought she'd pop back on soon enough. Meanwhile, I went back to watching some TV, checking the app now and then to see if she was back. But she didn't come back online. An hour slipped by, and it started to feel late for a visit. Plus, I was feeling the day's weariness settling in. The excitement of meeting up seemed to fade away. So, I decided to call it a night and went to bed. The sun was up early the next day, and so was I. The morning greeted me with a gentle rain and a sky still holding on to the night's shadows. The clock showed it was only 6:30 a.m. I was relieved it wasn't later. The day still had a chance for sleep. Yet, curiosity nudged me to check my phone for any new messages or unimportant notifications. To my surprise, there were several alerts from Badoo. Anna had sent multiple messages. Blinking away sleep, I opened the app. Her first message said, "I'm on my way. Should be there by 3 a.m. Then at around 3:20 a.m. she wrote, "I've arrived." By 4 a.m., the messages took a chilling turn with, "I'm watching you." Her status showed she was online. Just then, another message came in, making the familiar beep sound. "How did you sleep?" it read. A wave of fear washed over me, my heart pounding against my chest. I hurried to the window, scanning the bushes for any signs of her, before quickly closing the blinds. Fingers trembling, I typed back, "Who are you?" Almost instantly, a reply came. "Check your closet." I stared across my room at the closet door, slightly ajar. A door I was certain had been closed the night before. Panic seized me, my scream echoing as the closet door crept open, revealing the darkness within. I called out for my father, forgetting in my terror that he was away for the weekend. Only my older brother was home. He rushed to my aid, and together, we braved a look inside the closet, finding nothing. A chill brushed against me, a reminder of my neglect to lock my window the night before. The situation seemed clearer, yet no less terrifying. I went to the police, hoping they could trace the sender through the messages on Badoo, but was met with the reality of needing a court order for such information. Despite the fear, I chose not to pursue it further. After a week filled with dread, nothing else happened, allowing me to gradually move on from the incident. A few years ago, I made a really bad choice that ended up putting me in a very scary situation with someone I think might be a killer, or even worse. I was a 21-year-old girl, and this happened around 3 years ago when I was 18, right after I finished high school. It was a hot August day, and up to that point, my summer had been super boring. I lived with my dad, who was very strict and overprotective, to the point where it felt like he was being mean to me in an emotional way. He didn't let me have any friends, and I had to stay home all the time, doing chores, or just being there for whatever he needed. He even took the door off my room to make me feel trapped. Finally, he got me a phone about a month before all this happened. He usually took my phone away at 8 p.m., but this night he came home late and drunk, so I think he forgot to take it or thought I was asleep. I had Tinder on my phone, which was my way of meeting people and trying to make friends. Growing up, I didn't really have any close friends. Most of the kids at school either pretended to be my friend or made my life difficult. I started talking to a guy on Tinder. Let's call him Alex. We hit it off pretty fast, but I had to be careful to delete our chats before giving my phone to my dad, who would have been furious if he knew I was using Tinder. Alex was 28, and at the time, I felt good that someone older was interested in me. But now, I see it was a bit weird. I told him a bit about my home life, and he offered for me to come live with him, saying I was an adult and didn't have to listen to my dad anymore. This idea excited, but also scared me. Alex said he could come get me that night, but I wasn't ready for such a big step. I just wanted to hang out first, and he agreed. He planned to pick me up at midnight. I told him I had to be back by 4 a.m., and asked him to park on the road, not in our driveway, to avoid waking my dad. My dad's house had a long driveway with trees all around, making it a bit hidden from the road. Alex preferred texting, so I gave him my number, but warned him not to text me after 8 p.m. on normal days because of my dad. Right on time, Alex texted he was outside. I sneaked out and headed down the driveway, but didn't see his car. I thought maybe he turned it off to stay hidden because of my dad. Halfway down, I heard whispering and then sudden laughter, which quickly went quiet, followed by more whispering. I continued walking quietly, getting closer to where I thought Alex was. As I got closer, I realized he was talking on the phone. It was a one-sided conversation, and I felt bad for listening in. But my gut told me something was off, and I needed to be careful. This decision might have saved my life. The things I overheard were horrifying. He talked about waiting for me, planning to hurt me in the worst ways possible, and wanting to keep me in that state for as long as he could. Hearing this, I almost got sick right there and then. My movement must have made some noise because suddenly Alex went silent. Running back to the house seemed risky, so I chose to hide. I knew a spot in the woods near our house where I thought I could stay safe. I dashed back, veering into the trees, and settled into my hiding place, hoping I'd be okay there. After a quiet few minutes, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Alex asking where I was. I ignored it, quickly turning off my phone's sound. But he didn't stop. He kept sending messages and calling. After several calls, I thought maybe if I answered and lied about why I couldn't meet him, he'd leave me alone. I told him something came up and I couldn't make it, apologizing and suggesting we meet another time. But he didn't believe my lie. He became furious, accusing me of wasting his time. Then, he started insulting me, saying mean and hurtful things about how no one would ever love me. But what scared me the most was when he said, "I know where you live." That threat made my heart stop. How did he know where I lived? I had been so careful, but suddenly I felt trapped and more scared than I had ever been before. The darkness of the woods that had once felt like a safe hiding place now seemed like a scary trap, and I didn't know what to do next. Hearing him say he knew where I lived, followed by a chilling goodbye, made my blood run cold. Then the line went dead. Within moments, I heard a car engine roar to life and then fade into the distance as it sped away. That was the last I heard from him. But the fear he instilled in me didn't leave as quickly. I spent the whole night wide awake, too scared to close my eyes, dreading he might come back to make good on his threat. The next day, with my dad out, I took a step I had never dared before. I called my grandma and poured out everything. I told her about the terrifying encounter and all the years of suffering under my dad's roof. She came for me right away, no questions asked, and we left without telling my dad anything. My grandma had always known my dad was tough, but she had no idea the extent of his cruelty until then. Confiding in her was a relief. It felt like breaking free from a nightmare. Since moving in with her, I've been slowly rebuilding my life, finding happiness and planning a future with my girlfriend. When I reached out to the police, hoping for some form of justice or protection, they told me there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence. It was a harsh reminder of how some dangers are difficult to pin down, especially when they hide behind screens and anonymity. I couldn't help but worry about Alex, if that was even his real name, possibly preying on others. Despite the horror of that night and the shadow it cast, I've been working on moving forward, healing from the past and focusing on the promise of a better tomorrow. The experience taught me the value of reaching out for help and the importance of speaking up about abuse, even when it's hard. Life is gradually getting brighter, and I'm determined to make the most of it, cherishing the peace and security I found away from the terrors of my past. Back when this happened, I had tried meeting people online, specifically on a site called Match.com. I didn't have much luck. 2 attempts led nowhere, and with the third person, things ended after 4 months of dating. Feeling a bit drained from serious relationships, I thought it'd be nice to keep things light and easy for a while. That's how I ended up matching with a girl named Hazel. We seemed to hit it off okay over messages. Hazel didn't hesitate to accept my invitation to come over to my place for the evening. She arrived about 30 minutes later and was much quieter face to face. We spent the evening in my room, located on the 2nd floor of my place. We chatted here and there with the TV on, but mostly ignored. The conversation was punctuated by awkward pauses, though I tried my best to keep things going. All the while a thought nagged at me. Will we kiss? Is she waiting for me to make a move? How should I even approach this? But as the night wore on, I began to notice something off about Hazel. She grew more detached. Her gaze often fixed somewhere far off in the room as she spoke slowly, touching on darker and darker topics. Then she said something unexpected. She thanked me for letting her stay the night. It seemed there was a misunderstanding. When I invited her to hang out, she took it as an invitation to actually sleep over. She got up from the bed, inquiring about which blankets she could use to make a spot for herself on the floor. I fetched some blankets and pillows for her, setting up a makeshift bed on the ground. She thanked me, then turned away to lie down, apparently ready to sleep. I turned the TV off and tried to sleep myself. We didn't speak at all after that, and the silence felt extremely awkward. About 30 minutes after I had turned everything off, I suddenly woke up. Something felt odd. I sat up, looking down where Hazel should have been sleeping, but the floor was empty. I turned on a nearby lamp, scanning the room. She was gone. But just then, a voice echoed from downstairs. The noise seemed like it could be Hazel. My apartment walls are very thin, making sounds travel easily from one room to another. I tiptoed out of my room, pausing at the top of the stairs to listen more closely. The upper floor was dark, and she was speaking in a whisper. It was hard to make out her words. I thought maybe she was talking on her phone, so I decided to go downstairs to see. Entering the pitch-black kitchen, I found her there, but she wasn't on the phone. She was just sitting creepily in a chair, facing the wall, whispering to herself. I stood there, unable to move or speak, until finally, I managed a weak, "Hazel." She slowly turned her head to look at me, then, after a brief pause, turned back to the wall. I rushed back to my room and dove into my bed to call my dad. It took a few tries before he answered, clearly worried by my call. I whispered to him, trying not to panic, explaining that a girl I met online was supposed to only visit for the evening but was now acting very strangely in my kitchen. He was confused and advised me to call the police if it seemed she was in some kind of distress and needed help. As I was talking to him, I noticed a shadow near my door in the dark. It was Hazel. I could only see the outline of her figure. She just stood there, silently for a while, as my dad kept asking what was happening on the phone. Then suddenly, Hazel rushed at me, screaming wildly. She attacked, trying to choke me, but I managed to fight back, pinning her down on the bed, yelling for my dad to call the police. I somehow got her downstairs just as the police arrived. They took her away, and I had to give a statement about what happened. This experience taught me a harsh lesson about the importance of meeting strangers from the internet, in safe, public places first. I don't often use these apps, but there's this one time that I can't forget. It happened with a dating app. I matched with a girl who was very beautiful. She seemed easygoing and wanted nothing more than a simple evening out. No tattoos, no interest in wild parties, and it didn't look like she was into drugs. Everything pointed to a calm, quiet night. We decided to meet for dinner to see if we could enjoy a conversation together. It was a typical diner, a place I had only visited once, and it probably closed down later that year. We chose a booth at the back. Without any hesitation, the girl sat next to me. Okay, a bit odd, but not the strangest thing I've experienced. We started chatting, exchanging names, when suddenly, I felt her fingers slip into mine. I pretended not to notice for some reason. It seemed unlikely she was trying to hold hands within just 30 seconds of meeting. When the server came back to get our drink orders, her fingers intertwined with mine fully. It was actually happening. But that's not the strange part. She never let go of my hand during the whole meal. "Can you squeeze harder?" she asked me. This request was just the beginning of a night that turned out to be far from ordinary. The way she held on to me felt more like a warning than a gesture of affection. The evening was young, and the real horror had yet to unfold. "What?" I answered, confused by her request. "Just squeeze them real hard. My hands are so small compared to yours," she kept saying. I went along with it, thinking she was just trying to be playful. She laughed and shook my hand back and forth as if we were strolling somewhere, not sitting in a crowded diner. Even when our food arrived, she didn't let go of my hand. We awkwardly managed to eat using just one hand each, while she kept asking me to squeeze her hand tighter and tighter. It was then I realized this wasn't playful behavior, it was downright weird. I noticed people at other tables giving us odd looks, making me even more aware of the strange situation I was in. "You're so strong you could really hurt someone," she said. "Keep squeezing until I tell you to stop." she insisted. All I could manage was a bewildered, huh? Squeeze harder, I want to feel my bones crunch, she instructed. Now, I was truly alarmed. It seemed as if she was asking me to injure her. I finally managed to free my hand from her tight hold. What I had hoped would be a normal date turned out to be an encounter with someone completely unhinged. I asked for the bill while she begged me to stay, claiming it was all a misunderstood joke. I paid, left the diner, and never looked back. I didn't even need to block her on the app. I deleted it right after leaving. Yet sometimes I find myself wondering what she was really after. And more importantly, did she ever find it? I'm a social woman, but bigger than what many men prefer, making it hard for me to connect with others. Despite this, I've been on every dating site you can think of for over 5 years. It seemed like the only way to keep up with dating without always being let down. Meeting people online can lead to some strange experiences. One time, I agreed to go on a date with someone who turned out to be one of the shortest men I had met. I don't mind dating shorter men, but I'm tall at 5'11" inches and also big, so it feels odd when they're much smaller. This guy was only 5'4" inches and barely weighed 115 pounds. Even though we were very different in size, he came across as a nice person. We shared a lot of interests, and unlike many people you meet online, he had a stable life. It's not common to find someone with a steady job, their own car, and a place to live. So naturally, I was interested in talking more with him. We decided to meet for drinks at a bar. He was friendly, and we were enjoying ourselves. But after a while, he started making strange remarks about how tall I was and how strong I looked. At first, I thought he was just not great at social situations, but there wasn't anything mean in what he said. However, he kept going on about my size with almost every sentence. As time went on, I felt more and more uneasy. I couldn't relax anymore. And strangely, I started to understand what it feels like when people say they are treated like objects, not humans. Near the end of our meeting, he shared that he had a special liking for being picked up and held tight by women bigger than him. He mentioned this was the only thing that made him happy for many years. I thought, well, everyone has their own likes, and now I knew why he was drawn to me physically. So, I agreed to see him again. But then, his messages began to focus solely on how much he looked forward to me lifting him with my strong arms, even asking if I could lift him over my head. Soon that became all he talked about, and I have to say, it made me uncomfortable. I kindly told him I wasn't interested anymore. He reacted better than I expected, considering how forward he was. I was half expecting him to beg, saying I was the only one for him, but I judged him too quickly. He was actually respectful, just very open about his preference. Yet, that wasn't the oddest part. The most bizarre encounter? I had matched with someone on OkCupid, but we never met. After a short chat, he disappeared for a few months. Then one day, he messaged me again, apologizing for the silence and explaining he had been seeing another person from OkCupid. That was fine. It's what the site is for, after all. He said they had broken up but still talked sometimes. So, I wondered, what did this have to do with me? He revealed that although they didn't connect well, their physical relationship was strong. They were curious if I'd be interested in joining them to spice up their experiences. This proposal felt wrong and insulting, and it pushed me away from dating sites for a while. But there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I eventually met my current partner on OkCupid, and I've never been happier. It seems you just have to navigate through the unsuitable matches and the strange ones until you find the right person for you. Back then, I had a job that was kind of related to the adult industry. It was legal, paid well, and I had lots of free time. Was it safe? Not exactly. Was it enjoyable? Probably more than it should have been. I was at a point in my life where I found danger thrilling. I often used dating apps for fun because my job involved a lot of casual encounters. However, I kept work and personal life separate. The men from my job were just clients, nothing more. I hoped to find a regular boyfriend on one of these apps, not considering that he might not accept my job. I matched with a guy who was exactly my type. He was everything I had ever wanted. I didn't tell my friends about him. fearing they might somehow take him away from me before we could meet. Looking back, I wonder if I sensed that it was too good to be true. This period felt like being showered with love. It was the honeymoon phase where everything seems perfect, but this intense connection started to interfere with my work. Eventually, we decided to meet. We skipped the usual date steps, and I went to his place late one night after work. Our connection was intense from the very beginning. It was passionate and free, completely different from the structured encounters at my job. With him, I felt like I could truly be myself and let go. However, as things progressed, he started to change. He began speaking to me in ways I found very upsetting. From our first conversations, he'd used dirty talk, but now it went too far. It was mean, degrading, and honestly, it frightened me. "I thought you liked this," he remarked. I was lost for words. He started mentioning details about my job and what I did there. It hit me then that he must have known me from the club. There we were, naked and entwined in his bed, his hands tight around my neck. In that moment, I realized there was nothing I could do but submit and hope to survive. I'll spare the details of what happened next. It's a painful memory for me and upsetting for many others. The violence escalated to the point where I kept losing consciousness. Those few friends I confided in simply said I must have passed out. Afterward, he insisted I stay the night. I spent a horrifying night fearing the worst. Would he hurt me again? Would he force himself on me once more? I didn't know what would happen, but was terrified of the possibilities. Staying there felt like a nightmare. Escaping and turning to my coworkers for support, I found none. Some disbelieved me outright. Others suggested it was all a misunderstanding. A few even knew the guy and defended him, assuring me he wasn't capable of such actions. I felt like a villain for speaking out. Next, I sought comfort from my true friends, those outside my work life. They knew of my job and partly blamed me for what happened, suggesting I had put myself in a risky situation. It was my first encounter with victim blaming in the early 2000s. Feeling isolated and scared, I decided to take control of what I could. I went for medical tests to check for pregnancy or STDs, seeking some peace of mind. Waiting for the results in the clinic was a brief respite. I made myself comfortable, trying to find solace in the quiet. But then, I saw something on my phone that shocked me. An acquaintance had shared a screenshot of my Tinder profile and a personal text. The man who attacked me had turned my ordeal into a joke online. I broke down, feeling utterly defeated and alone. I left my job soon after. The most terrifying part was how my profession led people to disregard my experience. It felt like a personal hell, made worse by societal judgment. I want to remind everyone not to judge others by their lifestyle or job. Fortunately, my medical tests came back negative, but the emotional scars remained. Eventually, he lost interest in me and moved on to someone else. Please learn from my story. Beware of false kindness. Don't expect others to always have your best interest at heart. Avoid going home with strangers, and be cautious with dating apps. I used dating apps a lot when I was younger and not in a relationship. One day I matched with a man who was nearly 10 years older than me since I was just 21 then. The difference in our ages made me think twice, but we got along really well. We liked many of the same things and even enjoyed the same music shows. Finding so much in common with someone older made me feel good about myself. He was quick to talk about feelings and, within a week, said we should start a relationship right away. He wanted to make me happy and wasn't in a hurry for anything more. He was truly a kind man who wanted to care for someone. Then he suggested we should live together. He began to list what things we both had and what we needed. It was a funny yet sweet way to chat. It reminded me of playing a card game, but this was about planning our lives together. He even mentioned he'd like to take care of my little girl. That meant a lot to me since I was young, on my own, and new to being a mom. He talked about how he would help out, which was exactly what I needed to hear. As days passed, our chats turned more serious, and he began sharing stories of his past. Some stories were odd, about places he lived that no longer existed, and friends I could never find online. This made me curious, but I brushed it off. thinking everyone has some quirks. But then, things got stranger. He would call me at odd hours, claiming he was just checking in, but it felt like he always knew when I was alone. Sometimes I could swear I heard unfamiliar voices or noises in the background of our calls, but he dismissed them as nothing or changed the subject quickly. One night, he sent me a message saying he was outside my house, wanting to surprise me, but I never told him where I lived. Panic set in as I peeked through the window, but no one was there. When I confronted him, he laughed it off, saying it was just a joke to test my reaction. I started to feel uneasy about him. His perfect image began to crack, revealing something darker underneath. He knew things about me that I hadn't told him, like my daughter's school and my work schedule. The final straw was when I found a picture in my mailbox. It was a photo of me and my daughter, taken from a distance. On the back, written in a neat, almost elegant handwriting, was a message. "Can't wait for us to be a family." No return address, no name, just those chilling words. That's when I realized this was no longer about finding love. It was about escaping a nightmare that had just begun. But what he did do was look at me. A long, uneasy look that made me very uncomfortable. His gaze was empty, without any feeling, just staring straight into my eyes. If he ever looked at a different part of my face, he'd give the same intense stare until his eyes moved again. I had never experienced anything like it. We paid for our own meals and I went back home. We kept messaging for another week while I tried to figure out how to tell him I wasn't interested anymore. He started to plan another date, which made me finally speak up. We messaged back and forth for about an hour, going over the same thing. We wouldn't talk or see each other again. He kept saying he didn't understand, and continued with his overly affectionate words. When I finally made it clear we were done, he accepted it surprisingly well. He didn't beg or ask for another chance. I never heard from him after that. But I can't forget that stare. It's what people mean when they say someone is drilling holes into them with their eyes. Dark, small, never blinking. My heart would pound louder the longer he looked at me. Sometimes I think about what was going through his mind while he sat there, staring that way. After my breakup with my first girlfriend at 21, I found myself alone after a long time. Getting used to being single was strange and new to me. Time passed, and I decided it was time to start meeting new people again. So, I began to use several dating apps. One of these apps was OkCupid, which quickly became my favorite. There, I connected with a girl named Sarah. We shared a lot of common interests, and she seemed really cool and beautiful. She had lovely dark skin and a bright smile. After chatting for a while, we agreed I would pick her up for dinner. I arrived at her house in the east part of the city by 7 p.m., just as it was getting really dark outside. I sent Sarah a message, but she took some time to reply. I waited anxiously in my car, staring at my phone for her response. Finally, she texted back, apologizing and telling me, "Hey, sorry for the delay. My brother will come out to meet you first. He's overly protective." I wasn't happy about meeting her brother and showed my disappointment, but Sarah kept apologizing, saying she had no choice. Then the front door opened and a tall guy came out heading towards me. I stepped out of the car to greet him, noticing right away that he was much taller than me. Another thing that struck me was how his skin was a much darker tone than Sarah's, making it hard to believe they were siblings. He introduced himself as Mike with a friendly handshake. At first, he seemed okay, just a brother caring for his sister, wanting to ensure she was in good hands. We chatted briefly, and he seemed all right. Eventually, he invited me inside to meet Sarah. He led me through the door and into the living room, telling me to wait there while he went upstairs to get her. As Mike disappeared upstairs, I noticed the living room was not empty. Two guys were sitting on the sofa, their stares making me feel uneasy. I tried to be friendly and greeted them, but only got a faint nod from one. Suddenly, Mike's voice echoed from above, saying he was looking for Sarah, which sounded strange to me. Glancing towards the dining area next to the living room, I spotted another guy at the table, also watching me closely. Feeling a rush of fear, I moved towards the door without turning my back to the men. One of them shouted, "Catch him!" as they saw me reaching for the door. I managed to open it and dashed to my car, barely escaping their grasp. They followed me, pounding on my car windows as I started the engine. I drove off, surprised that such chaos on a quiet street didn't attract more attention. When I got home, I told my parents everything, still panting from the scare. They were shocked and urged me to contact the police. Following their advice, I reported everything to the authorities. A neighbor had witnessed the men attacking my car and confirmed my account to the police anonymously. The police caught 3 out of the 4 men in the house, including Mike, or whatever his name actually was. The 4th man remained at large, unidentified. This incident didn't stop me from using dating apps, but it made me much more careful in the future.